Okay, my friends, here it is. The video that is going to explain to you the ideal way to tuck in the garden for the long winter's nap. Because it is November now, and that means that the fall crops are finishing up. The Brussels sprouts, the cabbage, the collard greens, it's all finishing up. And so now the success of next year's garden begins now. So I'm going to utilize some footage from my recent consulting trip to Tennessee, and I will show you what we do there, utilizing those materials. But if you don't have those materials, when we come back, I'll explain to you what materials you can use. So the most important thing that you're about to see is the process. So observe what we're doing. You can emulate this in your own environment. Now, when we come back, I'm going to explain different materials that you can use, but also I'm going to explain things you should not be using right now. There's several things you should not add to the garden in the fall. It's better to hold off until the spring, and we will get into that when we come back. Okay, my friends, first thing we got to do is say hi to Doug, the giant Mastiff guard dog. He's so good at his job. Now, what we're looking at here is a structure at the Tennessee plot that was built to feed the cattle. And so the round bales of hay are placed in the center, and as they eat the hay, they deposit the manure right there, and then they trample all over it. So it goes from being like this, it gets mixed up with the urine and the hay and everything stepped on, and then once a year, maybe twice, well, pretty much once a year, we'll come through and look at that. We will scoop that stuff up. And this stuff is essentially composted, not entirely, but it's not like using fresh stuff. So we're going to get this stuff into the dump trailer. Utilize whatever kind of equipment you have available. Just get that stuff, because look at it, guys. It's nice and thick, rich with microbial life, nutrients, and you see it's mostly broken down already. You take a little crumble to it, and this is the good stuff, guys. So another type of manure that you can utilize is that from goats or sheep or alpaca or rabbits. Any of those type of manures are going to be fine to utilize. They're all those in that category are going to be very benign, meaning that you can't burn the plants with it. You don't have to worry about anything, except the same rule still applies. If they're eating hay, then you need to make sure it's not been contaminated with the broadleaf herbicides. The only drawback is that it's difficult to gather these tiny little pellets. So that's going to be difficult to gather sufficient quantities, even if you have a lot, unless you have some kind of pin set up where all the manure is going to be concentrated in one area. Or if you just have a tiny little garden, that's perfectly fine as well. Very good to utilize that stuff. Also very good to make a tea out of that kind of manure. Now, another type of manure that we have available on this plot is the chicken manure, which is another wonderful source. It's got tons of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, yes, also calcium and magnesium. So here we are with the kids doing their farm chores, and they just love this kind of stuff. Look at little Bonnie. She's just loving gathering these eggs. So is Forrest. So is Gracie. Wonderful kids, wonderful family. And they are getting their hands dirty, getting in there. Now, this chicken manure is really good stuff, but there's not enough of it built up yet to be utilized in the garden. This coop is still too new. So we're going to let that gather up for some time further. And for now, we're just going to use this cow manure that we know for sure has not been contaminated with the broadleaf herbicide. That is the only reason that we're using it. I want to be clear again. We know this stuff is not contaminated, and so that's why we're using it. Now, we're going to take wheelbarrows, and we're going to put it onto these beds. These beds are 5 feet wide by 40 feet long, and there's, I think, 8 of them, yes. And so we are going to dump this stuff, putting it pretty thick, because we're not doing cover crops this year. We're not adding Viking granular nutrients. We're not adding anything else other than this manure. And that's going to be virtually everything that the plants need, guys. I mean, this is the old school classic fertilizer. Now, one drawback is these huge clumps, you see? And so we can't be having that, because that will make pockets of super rich, too rich stuff in the bed. And it's going to be hard to plant certain crops into that. So for this plot, we are going to just till in these this manure. That's going to get that organic matter in there, deep in there, and that's going to make it so that we can just leave it be the rest of the year. So we are not going to till this come springtime. So we've added the organic matter, we've incorporated it, and now we're not going to till again. We're just going to plant next year. And so you can follow a similar thing even if you don't have a tiller. I'll explain here shortly how you can do it otherwise. Then we want to get some hard-working boys like these and start dumping the wood chips in the path. Now, if you remember, we had coal mine conveyor belt in the path of this plot, and it worked great. No weeds come up through it, but it's got several drawbacks. Very intensely hot and just unpleasant to work with, and doesn't allow for the rain to penetrate. So these arborist wood chips are going to allow for lots of rain to penetrate. They're going to make it so that the microbial activity is happening. They're just all around better. Now, the only downside is that they're not going to block out the weeds as good, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when it comes. So here's the thing, guys. If we're using any types of manures or chop and drop as well, crop residues, we want to add all that stuff in the fall time because it's going to take all winter to become plant available, to break down properly. And so we've got these wood chips throughout the pathways, and then we've got the beds covered. We just layer that organic material on there and then cover it with the landscaping fabric. That's going to allow it to breathe, but that's also going to keep the light off of it. And this is going to really make it nice so that come springtime, we're essentially just going to burn the holes in this plastic and plant right into it. Now, we are going to plant some garlic right now. So that is the only reason these beds are uncovered. Otherwise, we want to keep everything covered all winter. Okay, so there you have the process. Now, let me explain to you a few things. Like I already said, the only reason we're using manures is because we are sure that it's not contaminated with the broadleaf herbicides. You have to be sure. Now, second thing is that we are not using the chicken manure because there was not enough buildup yet. So there was too many wood shavings in relation to the amount of chicken droppings that were in there. And so we're going to let that go for quite some time more before we would incorporate that into the garden. There's just too much wood chips in there. And especially those kind of pine cedar wood chips take a long time to break down. So now, you saw us incorporate the manure into the garden, but you don't necessarily have to do that. And in fact, the only things that I would really recommend incorporating are big chunks of manure. I mean, with the tiller, because other than that, it's best to just put it on top, to just put the layer on top. So if you don't have manures, then you can utilize leaves. Leaves are a wonderful thing, guys. Earthworms love the leaves. It's going to help protect the soil from the ultraviolet radiation. It's going to help to nourish the life in the soil, insulate it a bit so that that microbial activity can keep on happening. So pretty much everyone should have access to leaves for the most part, unless you're in the desert, and then we'll talk about that in a moment. But you should collect the leaves, take everything off of the soil, and then put the pile of leaves, 6 inches, a foot, even 2 feet, it doesn't matter. Keep it nice and thick, and that's gonna mat down and insulate the soil over the winter time. Then in the springtime, we will take that off and let that soil warm back up. Because if you just leave that on there, which you can do, and then plant right into the earth underneath in the spring, it will take weeks, a month or more longer for that soil to heat up in the springtime than it would have otherwise if you didn't have that thick layer of mulch. Remember that in the spring, okay? So mulch is great at insulating the soil, but also it keeps it cooler weeks longer than if you exposed it for a couple of weeks. So, but we'll talk about that in the springtime. So leaves work really well. Another thing that works really well if you don't have leaves is cardboard. You can put cardboard over the garden all winter long. Put several layers thick, and that's going to block the ultraviolet radiation. That's going to allow water to pass through. It's going to feed the earthworms. Earthworms and garden worms, all the worms, love cardboard as well. So put layers of cardboard down if you don't have access to leaves. Weight it down with stones or something. Another thing you can do is grass clippings. Another thing is straw. All that stuff can just go straight on top of the soil. And if you don't have anything, then just landscaping fabric is better than nothing, okay? Now, I wouldn't necessarily put straight up plastic over the garden unless you're trying to start a garden for next year, which you will see a video on that coming in the next few weeks when we do it at the Viking North plot. The parameters are relatively simple. You need to cover the soil. You need to be insulating it from the sun. You need to be insulating it from temperature extremes and give the microbes something to eat. Ideally, leaves, grass clippings, all those things we just talked about. Chop and drop, like you've seen from my other videos, yes. Because now at this point in the season, it's too late for cover crops. You don't want to be planting cover crops. They don't have enough time to get the growth that you want. Cover crops should have been planted a month ago for the most part. You can, if you're in a warmer area, you could plant winter rye if you needed to. But at this point, just cover the soil. Okay, so let me know if you have any questions. Put them in the comments below. Let me know what you guys have used for garden mulches and things like that. Now, your compost and your bone meal, your blood meal, your dry amendments, all that kind of stuff, wait. Do not add that stuff in the fall time. It doesn't have enough staying power like the manures do. So all the compost, all that stuff, just keep it until the springtime. That's when you want to utilize that stuff. If you go adding Viking granular nutrients or blood meal or bone meal now, you're wasting it. Okay, so even compost, you're pretty much wasting it. Save it till the springtime because that stuff breaks down so much faster. Okay, so I will see you guys right here every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern time for the live Q&A.